I had spent a year planning that wedding. Every flower, every table, every song was chosen with love. But I didn't know that while I was chasing perfection, the people closest to me were planning my humiliation. My fiancé Brian, who once held my hand and whispered dreams about our future, had become distant in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. My sister Candace kept brushing off my concerns with her plastic smile, telling me I was just anxious. My mother was too busy worrying about what the guests would think of the floral arrangements. The day of the wedding, I stood at the altar in a dress that took 6 months to finish, looking into the eyes of the man I thought I would grow old with, only for him to hesitate. His silence grew louder than any I do could have. Then it happened. He confessed in front of everyone that he couldn't marry me because he was in love with someone else. And that someone else was Candace. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. My legs trembled, my heart shattered into shards too small to pick up. My mother didn't run to comfort me. Instead, she scolded me for not holding myself together in front of everyone. I walked out of the church alone, mascara smeared, my soul crumbling. I didn't go back home. I didn't call anyone. I vanished, leaving my phone on the church pew and walking until my heels bled. That night, I slept in a park, clutching the edge of my dress like a lifeline. The next day, I walked into a small, quiet town far from anyone who knew my name. I had no plan, no future, just a broken heart and the faint hope that somewhere out there, peace might exist. The town was small, almost like something out of a forgotten novel, where everyone smiled and the air smelled like cinnamon. I wandered into a bakery with a little blue sign that said Millie's Morning Loaf. The warm aroma of fresh bread and vanilla welcomed me like an old friend. Behind the counter was an elderly woman with silver curls and eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. "Rough day?" she asked, not unkindly. I nodded, and before I knew it, she poured me a cup of coffee, handed me a buttery croissant, and listened. I told her everything: how my family had betrayed me, how my wedding turned into a horror show, how I had nothing left. Millie didn't flinch. She just handed me an apron and said, "Everyone needs a new beginning." Start kneading. That day, I baked for the first time in my life. I burned the first batch, spilled flour on my shoes, and nearly cried when the dough refused to rise. But Millie was patient. She showed me how to feel the dough like it was alive, how to listen to the rhythm of rising yeast, how to bake with. So, for the first time in days, I smiled. Baking became therapy, and Millie's bakery became my sanctuary. I swept floors, washed dishes, greeted customers, and slowly pieced myself back together. Weeks turned into months. I rented a small room above the bookstore across the street. I saved every penny. I learned the names of the town's regulars: the teacher who always ordered cinnamon rolls, the widower who came for carrot cake every Thursday. I became someone new, someone strong. Millie treated me like a daughter she never had. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on the porch sipping chamomile tea as she told me stories of her past, of a love she once lost and never found again. It healed something in me to know I wasn't the only one rebuilding a life from ashes. Winter came, and with it, the smell of gingerbread and peppermint flooded the bakery. By then, I could bake with my eyes closed. Millie trusted me with everything, from managing orders to designing window displays. She'd often say, "You've got magic in your hands, girl." Then one snowy evening, Millie handed me a letter. It was from her lawyer. She was leaving the town to live with her niece in Florida due to her declining health. But more than that, she was leaving the bakery to me. I stared at her in disbelief. "Why me?" I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. She smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from deep conviction. "Because you gave this place a soul again. And because you need it more than anyone." I signed the papers with trembling hands. The woman who had once been left humiliated in a church, was now the proud owner of a bakery that smelled like hope. I renamed it the Rising Loaf, as a tribute to both baking and the rebirth I had experienced. I remodeled it slightly but kept Millie's spirit in every corner, from the chimes on the door to the old rocking chair near the window. People kept coming. They said the bread tasted better now. I knew it was because it was made with healing. News spread across the nearby towns. Bloggers and travelers started showing up. I even got featured in a food magazine that praised the shop as the bakery with heart. I hired two helpers, both women who had their own wounds to mend. We became a sisterhood of the broken and healing. On the bakery's 1-year anniversary under my ownership, I stood behind the counter wearing a flower-streaked apron, smiling at the line of customers that wrapped around the block. I had never felt prouder. I had no family in the traditional sense, but this town, this bakery, and these people had become mine. Then one day, as the warm scent of lemon tarts filled the air, a familiar voice echoed through the bakery. "Is that really you?" I turned slowly, and there they were, my mother, Candace, and Brian. They looked like ghosts from a life I no longer claimed. My mother gasped when she saw the bakery's sign. "You own this?" she asked incredulously. Candace looked uncomfortable. Brian looked older, as if regret had aged him. I didn't answer right away. I handed a bag of pastries to a customer and wiped my hands. "Yes," I said finally. "This is mine." My mother tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Candace began to speak, stammering something about regrets and how things didn't work out between her and Brian. I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, just emptiness. Brian apologized, saying he had made the biggest mistake of his life. I listened because I had nothing to hide anymore. But their words couldn't reach the woman I had become. I wasn't the broken bride anymore. I was a business owner, baker, and a survivor. My mother asked if I would come back home. I smiled gently and said, "I am home." The town had gathered around quietly, their eyes filled with protective warmth. I realized then how much I belonged here. My mother left in tears. Candace didn't say another word. Brian just stood there, ashamed. They left the way they came, in silence. I went back to the kitchen and resumed kneading dough. The past had come knocking, but I had answered not with revenge, but with resilience. That night, the whole town celebrated me. Not because I had confronted my past, but because I had chosen myself. I started a community program at the bakery for women who had been through trauma, divorces, betrayals, loss. We gathered once a week, sharing stories while baking muffins or kneading bread. It became something bigger than therapy. It was healing through cinnamon and honey. One woman had been abandoned by her husband after a cancer diagnosis. Another was a single mom raising 3 kids. Each had a story, and each found strength in the rhythm of dough and the comfort of warm scones. I expanded the bakery's space to include a small reading corner and a shelf of donated books. I hosted poetry nights, where people read verses about pain and survival. A local artist painted a mural on the outside while a phoenix rising from a loaf of bread. It became a landmark. Tourists took selfies with it. But to me, it was a reminder. Even when everything is burned down, you can rise. My story was picked up by a local news channel, then a national morning show called. They invited me to talk about how a ruined wedding turned into a thriving bakery. I stood in front of cameras with a plate of cranberry scones and told the world that being broken doesn't mean you're finished. That sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best chapter. Emails flooded in. Women from around the country wrote to me, sharing their own ruined weddings, toxic families, and silent rebuildings. I answered each one with love. I sent them recipes and notes of encouragement. I even got invited to speak at a women's conference about resilience. I accepted, not for the fame, but for the woman who once cried alone in a park wearing a wedding dress. Standing on that stage at the women's conference, looking out at hundreds of faces filled with hope, I felt something inside me settle like a puzzle piece finally locking into place. I told my story, not just about the wedding or the betrayal, but about the silence that followed, The quiet mornings when I kneaded dough while crying softly. The late nights when the scent of cinnamon felt like the only hug I had. And then the healing slow, imperfect, but real. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud, but it was long and warm, like a blanket. After the event, a teenage girl came up to me and hugged me tightly. She whispered, "I want to grow up to be like you." That moment meant more than any magazine feature or television appearance. It meant my pain had created light for someone else. Back home, I found a letter waiting at the bakery. It was from Millie. She had passed away peacefully, her niece wrote, but before she went, she told them about me. About how she had left her bakery to a stranger because she saw something special in me. I cried that night not out of grief, but gratitude. Millie had been the first person to believe in my healing when I couldn't. I hung her picture in the bakery above the cash register. Every customer who walked in saw her smiling face. I told every new employee about her. She became our guardian spirit. Life moved forward. I expanded the bakery into the next building. We added a cafe section with fresh soups and sandwiches. My little world kept growing, not in grandeur, but in warmth. I never remarried, not because I was afraid, but because I was full. My life was rich with purpose, connection, and quiet joy. Years passed, and the town changed around me. New shops opened, families moved in, children I had once given cookies to grew up and brought their own kids to the bakery. I had become part of the town's story. People would come in and say, "I heard you started all this because of a broken wedding." I would smile and correct them gently, "No, I started all this because I found the right people at the right time." My past faded, not erased but softened, like a scar that no longer hurts. I sometimes saw posts online, "Candace divorced again. Brian remarried." My mother now lived in a senior community. I felt no bitterness. That part of my life was another chapter, one that had to end so this one could begin. I started writing a memoir, part recipe book, part personal story. I called it The Rising Loaf, How I Baked Myself Back Together. It became a bestseller in indie bookshops. Readers sent pictures of their bread attempts with little notes about how they, too, were rising. One evening, a man came into the bakery wearing a pilot's uniform. He said he'd read my book on a flight and made a detour to meet me. He looked around the bakery like it was sacred. "This place," he said, "feels like it knows how to forgive." I didn't know what to say. But that night, as I cleaned up and stared at Millie's picture, I whispered, "We did it." Because we had not just survived, but transformed. I thought of that younger version of me, crying in her wedding dress. I wanted to go back and hold her hand and say, "It's going to hurt, but one day, you'll bake a life so beautiful. People will come from miles away just to taste your healing." Now, every morning, I unlock the bakery door as the sun rises over the town square. The golden light filters through the window, casting a warm glow on the shelves filled with scones, muffins, and loaves of bread. The bell above the door jingles, and the first customer of the day smiles and says, "Smells like home." And it does. Because I poured everything into this place, my pain, my healing, my hope. People don't just come here for food. They come to feel something. Maybe it's the sense of second chances. Maybe it's the memory of someone like Millie. Maybe it's the unspoken reminder that even when you're ruined, you're not finished. Every loaf I bake is a letter to the past, a message to my former self. You made it. And every smile from a customer is proof that love, true, nourishing love, doesn't always wear a white dress or come with rings. Sometimes it comes with flour on your cheeks and warmth in your chest. I host workshops now, teaching not just baking but storytelling. I ask people, "What's your rising loaf?" And the stories they tell of heartbreak, of resilience, of new beginnings fill the walls of the bakery with invisible strength. I built a community, not because I had a plan, but because I had nothing left to lose. And in that emptiness, I found everything. I don't think about the wedding anymore. It's a distant echo, like an old song you no longer feel. I think about the dough under my fingers, the laughter in the kitchen, the friendships forged over cinnamon rolls. I think about Millie and her quiet belief in me. And I think about how sometimes losing everything is the start of finding exactly where you belong.